Okay, welcome to another video on setting up your TVR Vixen suspension. The last thing that I did was to refit the new AVO dampers and springs, having adjusted the distance of the spring by adjusting the spring platform. So this was a consequence of measuring the ride height and finding there was a disparity in the ride height. I've hopefully now corrected that. So with 10.5 inch springs, I've set the damper to have 30 millimeters of thread below the spring platform. Okay, so having done that, I've not bolted up the dampers. I've not put the nuts on, just the dampers. So I've lowered the car to the ground, but it's artificially sitting too high because the suspension hasn't settled. So whenever you make changes to the suspension, you should always let it settle, and preferably by not doing all the nuts up tight, just leaving them a little bit loose, rocking the car backwards and forwards, and that should allow the suspension to settle. And then you have to run it in, especially if you fitted new bushes, and then retighten the bolts. So I'm just going to run the car backwards and forwards, and you'll see it settling on the suspension. Okay, I should really go and wash my hands now, because I might get grease on the headlining. So if you listen carefully, you should see the tyres, or you can hear the tyres adjusting themselves. You can also move the steering around. All of this will help the suspension to settle. You'll notice on the steering wheel there's a little telltale which rally drivers use to help them work out which way the wheels are pointing. Anyway, we'll move this backwards and forwards. Being careful not to crash into the garage door. Okay, a couple more times. Okay, and hopefully that's a reasonably settled suspension. We can now measure the ride height again. Now I would normally measure the ride height with a steel rule. And measure the distance between a flat floor and one of the triangulation plates to mount the chassis. So that's showing 160 millimeters. Before I changed the dampers and springs, it was 175. But I did raise the car some years ago for motorsport, so I'm not surprised by that, seeing as I'm now using the right springs. Okay. So that's now showing 160 on the offside, 150 on the near side, which probably suggests that may be a consequence of the rear suspension needing adjustment, because if the car is fairly stiff, it will transmit through. But that's an improvement over what it was. The chances of getting it perfectly set up are slim, because you might not have a perfect chassis to start with, but we're certainly getting there. Thanks for watching.